What is up, everyone? This is your host, Eric Holtzman, and welcome to the Mindful Motion Podcast. What is up, everybody? I hope you're having an amazing day. I'm here with my friend, my colleague, one of my mentors, Glen Owen. He is an exercise pro, entrepreneur, as well as a muscle system specialist. We sort of run in the same circles. And he's also a team member of Strata Internal Performance, a state-of-the-art exercise studio located in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada. He's also a marketing consultant for Fitness Pro Mentors, with a high-level marketing mentorship tailored for personal trainers who want to scale their businesses to six figures. And Glen, in my opinion, is an excellent communicator, a brilliant content and marketing creator, and he is also the host of his own podcast called the Growth Lab Podcast. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I've been wanting to do it for a while. Glen mentors me on content creation, communication, marketing, and fine-tuning those avenues for me. So I've been really grateful to work with him. I think it would be fun, before we jump into mobility, strength, longevity, active aging, and all that good stuff, how about we just talk a little bit about you and how you got into the fitness industry and how you became, an exercise professional.
I feel like I'm going to do myself a disservice because it's going to be pretty hard to follow that introduction. So I'll be as brief as I can because I think people are probably less interested in my background and more interested in the topics we're going to talk about. I got really lucky. I kind of fell into this thing. I started exercising when I was 15. I got picked on by this guy named, we'll call him SF to be for short. I know that I think this podcast would get to him because I think he's in the Netherlands or something. But I got picked on by this gentleman, and it was not a fun couple of years for me. And I thought to myself, well, if I add some muscle to my body, he won't pick on me anymore. Muscle takes a lot longer to add on your body than you might think it would in some cases, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if you and I both got into exercise in the era before social media, before maybe even the internet was really that widely available. So I was going off Arnold's, bodybuilding encyclopedia, so to speak. So still got picked on a little bit, but I found that as I worked on my body more and I saw these changes, I got more confident. I thought, hey, why don't I help more people with this? So I went to York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I got a kinesiology degree there. Completed it in 7 years and not 5 because I was not a very good student. Not the point. I do much better learning on my own. And that's kind of when I found the resistance training specialist program. And I found that I'm not unlike a lot of other people where university was okay or schooling was all right, but learning in the classroom really wasn't for me. It was out on the gym floor, practical kinesthetic learning that really hit home for me. And I met great people like Tom Purvis, who I know is both a mentor of ours, Sam Trotta, who is I believe the teacher for RTS in Canada and Toronto. And I got exposed to exercise in a whole new way. And it really opened me up to this world of we can do exercise way different and way more customized and way more scientific and way more titrated to individuals than I knew previously existed. And that pushed me into getting into personal training. And at first I worked with athletes at, provincial, some national people. And then from there I realized, what? National athletes and young athletes usually don't have a big budget to take care of the home, to help me take care of my family. And so I said, who needs help? It's people who have aches and pains, especially if they're older. It's a good market to be in, and I can contribute to their lives in a positive, meaningful way. It's really a win-win. And that kind of took me to where I am today, where I work with people very similar to you, the wonderful Eric Holtzman, where we help people who have some crazy things going on in their body move and feel better. So ultimately, they can live life in a way that makes them feel really fulfilled. I said I wasn't going to be too long, but here I am. Ultimately, what I do for a living is an extension of my greater purpose in life, which is I just want to help people feel more confident in their bodies, whether that's mentally, emotionally, physically, for work. And my vocation is where I do it predominantly, but that's how the podcast started. That's why I do social media. That's why I do my email blast. That's why I do everything. because it's really fulfilling for me. So that is, I suppose, Glen Owen in a nutshell. And I also really enjoy eating cake and watching movies. And as Eric rightly pointed out, I have my gaming chair behind me and like playing some video games too. So I am human, and I also have passions outside of exercise, short of the long.
Yeah, I mean, that's a full circle for sure. Started in kinesiology, like in college. Did you find any of that information actually transferred for you within the practical sense within working now, or do you not so much?
Yeah. Great question. Did you go to college or university out in the States there too, Eric?
I did, but surprisingly, I took philosophy and economics, so not really that practically applicable. Although philosophy applies to everything, it teaches you how to think. You know.
See, that's the interesting thing. It's so funny because I started in my first year of university as a philosophy major. So introduction to philosophy, ethics, morals, a whole bunch of different stuff before I went to kinesiology. I'll be honest with you, I didn't find at least what I studied in university to be wholly complicit or helpful in terms of my career. That's why I think the resistance training specialist course, Greg Mack's muscle system specialist course, some of these outside of the norm courses that people can take if they really want to learn about the human body, exercise are so beneficial. I don't make any money off saying that, by the way. So no, to be honest, I didn't learn that much about the actual practical exercise application. I think, and maybe you would mirror this, I learned like the how to follow the recipe piece, but not really the like how to be a chef. How do you just have, a human being, which you might look at as, hundreds of ingredients, and then what do I do with those hundreds of ingredients? What do I do with, the overall sum of their joints and their abilities to actually create exercise that's going to benefit them? I didn't get much of that in university. What I did get, very similar to, I think maybe what you were implying, was I got to learn to think a little bit more. So, being able to read research papers and understand the strengths of studies, what they did well, what they didn't do well, serves me well now, because I can now read and get ahead of research and learn more and apply that stuff to exercise that maybe people who didn't go to university and didn't spend time in nutrition labs. I spent a couple of years in a nutrition lab studying Lou Gehrig's disease in mice. I can learn that, and I've got more critical thinking skills perchance. But did I learn a lot about exercise? No, I learned to regurgitate exercise in university. And I don't know if you'd feel the same with your degrees and whatnot, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, I mean, it just seems to be the trend amongst people that go to university. It's very lab oriented, research based. It's good for people that want to do that kind of thing, but working in the gym environment, from hearing through the grapevine, it doesn't necessarily apply that well. I didn't take it, so I can't really speak to that. But as far as college being a waste of time, definitely not. It's great for honing your ability to think and challenge yourself in different types of subject matter. So in that sense, it's valuable for sure. Well, let's change
Yeah.
gears. Let's change gears for a
Go
second.
ahead.
I'm kind of you do a lot. You have a lot of different feet in different avenues. Between Fitness Pro Mentors, Strata Internal Performance, your own podcast. You got to train somewhere in there. How do you manage to do all of these things, grow your skill set, manage all these different business avenues or adventures, if you want to call them that, and still stay ahead of the game and not be overwhelmed?
Eric, that is an absolutely fantastic question. I don't even know if I've ever thought about that myself. That's really amazing. Let me think here for a moment. I hope this isn't too obscure, but it's the truth. And I actually love to hear how you manage it afterwards. I think we're all, as human beings, we're all different. I'm not great with focus. I mean, I'm very open with this. I share this with a lot of different people. I do have a mild form of ADD. If you're not aware, ADD is often a deficit in the amount of dopamine in the brain. And if you don't have enough dopamine in your brain, it's harder to switch out from like a broad focus into a narrow focus, which means that if you're doing something and someone distracts you, it's hard to get back into the thing that you were focusing on before. So very easily distracted in that sense. So I can be very scatterbrained, and maybe some people are like me like that, where it's diagnosed. Maybe they just have a hard time focusing, whatever that is. One of the things that has helped me manage everything and continue to grow, I would say there's two things. One is routines, and I think routines can also be looked at as systems in a way. I know you've heard me talk endlessly about systems, so I won't belabor the point, but if you have something you can repeatedly do, it takes a lot of the cognitive thought process out of it. And all there is to do is periodically review how that system is working. and then change it or titrate it or make whatever adjustments or manipulations you need to in order to move forward. So I'd say like that's the first thing is I'm very routine orientated. I tend to get up at the same time, go to sleep at the same time, work on the same schedule, do a lot of the same things. But I think the other half, and I think you may have asked about growth there, which is why this is coming up. But if you didn't, this is just maybe an extra tidbit. I think that the more abstract you can think and the more you can adopt a growth mindset and the more you just be open to new experiences, the quicker you're going to learn. So I think it kind of puts learning on autopilot a lot of the time, where I will just go and I'll try new different things because I'm open to trying new different things, learning to do different things, learning from my failures, read something, try to apply it. There's not even necessarily like a review period. It's just more, I've just maintaining my openness to new experiences and think on a subconscious level that helps me grow and manage my life. And so on one hand, it's just kind of rigidity with routines that work well. But on the other hand, it's still being flexible enough and open enough to allow some subconscious growth or changes to happen as they need to. I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that is, thinking about it now, that's sort of how I am without even knowing, just being open minded and willing to make mistakes, learn from the mistakes, challenge, try things. It's funny how many people really don't do that because it's uncomfortable. You're out of your element, you're trying something new. And this is a nice segue into exercise for the general population, for normal people. Most people don't exercise. When they start, it is a new thing. It's scary. It's a little, they're a little unsure of themselves. Are they going to get hurt? Is this going to help them? Who should I work with? So I think that it ties into this very nicely for people who are starting exercise or who are new to it. So it's kind of a nice segue into the next question I had, because I'm kind of curious what your thought is for the general population, a person in the general population. What do you think their mind views exercise as? Like, what is their definition of exercise for the normal layman person?
Oh boy. You know what? If you'd asked me this a couple of years ago, I would say most people think exercise is you bracket it into I'm doing like household activities or sports. That's kind of one thing. Like exercise, it's not exercise, right? Or there's resistance training, weights, or there's going to be cardiovascular. And then you some combination where like group classes might be more aerobic based, or they might be more resistance training based, or something like that. I would have said that a few years ago. To be honest, now I'm trying to work on adopting an opinion of everybody probably has a very different idea of what exercise is. If I asked 20 different people to think about an exercise, I'd probably get 20 different answers. Or if I got some that are similar, they probably look a little bit different. And so, from a general perspective, in terms of what do I think most people on like a very base layer think, probably that thing I would have told you a couple of years ago. Where I work at now functionally is I got no idea what most people think exercise is. And if someone's looking for an exercise professional trying to get into exercise, one of the first things I would say is like, know thyself. Like, think about you as a human being. How do you learn? What do you like? What do you don't like? What feels good for you to do? What doesn't feel good for you to do? What kind of, if you're looking for some support or a person, what kind of community do you like to be a part of? What kind of person do you like to interact with? Do you want to be at a small gym? Do you want to be at a big gym? Do you want to be a part of a community, or do you want to kind of fly solo? And then, from there, what has to happen in order for you to move forward? So, how does the general pop see fitness? I think everyone's going to be really, really different. At a very base layer, probably, household activity / sports, resistance training somehow, and some kind of cardiovascular activity another way that gets the heart rate up. And, most people are going to mishmash those to come up with whatever their idea of exercise is.
Yeah, sure. And it does seem to be intricately tied to aesthetics. At least here in LA, you won't find one person that doesn't mention the way they look as a component to exercise. Unfortunately, not necessarily a bad thing, but it does take away from all the value that's there. And it kind of leads me to ask you this next question is like, why do you think some people fail with their exercise? When you say fail, I don't really view it as failure, but people think it's failure. And then they end up stopping altogether. What do you think the main reasons for that is? And I know that's hard to generalize, but from some examples of instances you've seen this.
I mean, like, listen, help me out here. What do you think is the number one reason? I want to see if we're on the same page. What do you think the number one reason people fail when they start exercise processes?
Yeah, so like I just said, I don't really view it as a fail. You only fail if you stop. But it would seem like if your goal is lose a certain weight, look a certain way, you spend a few months and you're not there, you stop because you're not satisfied with the results you're getting. Even though you're making progress in some capacity, might not be fast enough. So people
Mm,
are not in for the process. They want it done quickly, is the way I see
mm,
it. And it might be a multi-year process to get to where they want. So if it doesn't happen quick, it's too much work, too much time, too stressful, whatever it might be, they stop and they
mm,
call that failure. Whereas we were just in the process, to me, that's the way I kind of see it.
mm. Yeah, like this. So like being so results driven that if the result isn't there in the time frame they had initially attached to the goal, they see that as failure, and that either kills their motivation or they lose momentum, and for whatever reason they just decide to stop at that point. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, that's kind of what it seems to be like, at
Yeah.
least from my experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to unpack the human psyche. I feel like very, very difficult in that regard. I really love this quote. I say this to a lot of different clients that I see in terms of, programming and planning how we move forward. And tell me if you've heard this before, committed, not attached. Have you ever heard that saying before? Committed,
No,
not
no,
attached?
no, I
Yeah.
haven't heard that.
So it's the idea that, if there's a destination we're trying to get to, like we're committed to getting there, but we're not attached to the path that it takes us to get there. Because very seldomly does plan A work out the way we want to, or plan B or plan C for that matter. And that's usually what life is a series of, these failures, quote unquote, that lead us to growth and new avenues, new neural pathways forming in the brain, new ways of seeing things, new ways to progress forward so that, if we are committed to this thing like we say we are, we'll get there eventually. It's just a matter of time and being okay with the amount of changing directions that we have to go through. It's very interesting, just the framing of I want to lose 15 pounds. That really doesn't talk about the person you become when you lose 15 pounds. Right? You can say to yourself, I want to lose 15 pounds. And I think that's very easy to get disappointed by because it's framed in the negative. The idea of I feel strong, healthy, and lean, and my body weight is 165 pounds and you're at 180, to me is a far more powerful goal that's going to pull you in that direction, so to speak.
Mhm.
So if I was to look at it, why do most people fail? I think most people are likely too attached to it being a certain way and going a certain way and just aren't on it to enjoy the journey as much or
Mhm.
can enjoy the journey of failure. And even the word failure is very much it's very much a perceptual thing. I think you and I would both agree as exercise professionals, we've probably failed a whole bunch on the journey to where we are today, but I never look back and say to myself, I'm a big failure because I failed all those times. It's really just, I found a whole bunch of ways that didn't work and I found some ways that really did work and I'm going to run with those things. So, most people end up failing in my term, like stopping, we'll define it as that short of the long because they're attached to a certain way of doing things rather than being committed to the path and the journey that's going to take them to get there. And like, I
Yeah.
suppose there's a small little asterisk, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I don't know if oftentimes people actually want the lose the 15 pounds as much as they want like the love and self-acceptance of their body and the way they feel that comes along with that, which is why I say, what's the positive way we pull ourselves into this that
Mhm.
makes us feel good rather than what's the thing we're trying to avoid and framing the goal that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just the framework you have in your mind and the way you perceive that situation is so pivotal as far as like whether you're going to keep going or stopping. And if you don't keep
Totally.
going, well, you're definitely not gonna get where you want to be. And then, of course, when we're this podcast, I wanted to touch base on longevity. And when you think about longevity and the vital component that exercise plays in that, it has to be
Mhm.
consistent, of course, and it can't just be
Yeah.
this end goal of 15 pounds and I stop. So the framework in your mind is really critical.
Yeah. May I add one more thing, if that's okay?
For
And
sure.
I know you probably used this before because I think this is a Tom Purvisism as I've heard it. Tom Purvis talks about resistance training as being something that's like compound interest, where the more you do it, the more compounds on itself. You get exponential improvements in health and the quality of your joints and your movement, and ultimately the quality of your life. As to where things like maybe just cardio, right? Even though it's great for your heart health, might not have the same kind of compounding interest. There's a certain amount of wear and tear of the joints it's going to cause. Even if we're just talking about pure energy burning, strength training will keep that resting metabolic rate elevated 70 up to 72 hours afterwards, give or take, right? Some standard deviations and some changes compared to just doing cardiovascular activity. I would say it's the same thing for like health and longevity, where, the more you go through exercise and the more you do it and get what you need, the compound interest it has on your life is unreal. It's insurmountable. It's absolutely fantastic. And if you don't have health and you don't have, enough money in the bank, or you don't have healthy relationships, whether it be to yourself or other people, you're likely going to be an unhappy person. You've got to be able to make enough money to take care of your lifestyle. You've got to be able to have the relationships to yourself and other people that make you feel good in your life and satisfied and fulfilled and happy. And you've got to have enough self strength and physicality to do what you want to do. Otherwise, you can't enjoy the other things that you have. And it's really about just doubling down and staying with the exercise process and finding a way to stay committed to it and have it work for you such that you do love it. Because just as I said before, you said before, how do you balance all this stuff out? If you get to the gym 3 days a week for a year, I almost guarantee you're never going to stop exercising for the rest of your life, because it's become so well ingrained in your routine and your nervous system, just as something that you do as a part of your daily routine, but also as your deeper psyche and understanding of self, that you just keep going. I will leave it there because I'm going to get on a tangent. So I won't belabor it any further. I appreciate you letting me take over there for a second there, Eric.
Well, I'll just add though, and then segue to a question, that it sounds good to be consistent, and you would be likely to stay with it if you do it more frequently as a habit, for sure. But of course, it all has to be appropriate for your body, and that's always the missing element for people. And I mean, Glenn, I'm a 60-year-old woman, and my back hurts, my knee hurts, and every time I work out at Pilates and I do these high intensity classes, I don't feel so good. So how am I supposed to stay with it?
Absolutely a great point. Are you asking me to respond to that as if I was a professional, or you're playing the devil's advocate there beautifully, might I add? Which is a great point. Which is, I hear the subcontext there is, I hear exercise is amazing, but my body doesn't let me do it. Am I screwed? Question mark.
Yeah, what do you do in these circumstances? Obviously, this is the client demographic we work with, but so many people want to train or want to exercise, but every time they go through this vicious cycle of injury, recovery, and even me, like all the injuries I have, I still have to be mindful and careful, because if I dose it just too much, I blow things up and then I don't feel so good. So people don't quite understand that. So I guess, could you walk me through what's happening there and how someone might take a different approach to not have that happen?
Yeah. So are we talking about, like, if someone's got some like stuff and like unwanted sensations in their body and they want to do more exercise, but every time they do, they blow themselves up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say I have kind of two answers. And the first one is like the bias to my profession one, which is, if at some point you've tried a lot of different things and nothing's really seeming to work, and you're starting to get desperate and you're wondering what's going to happen in the future, a decade from now, it's time to seek professional help. And I'm not saying see me or see Eric, even though I think you should, right? I'm saying you've got to seek professional help in some way, shape, or form from someone that purports that they can help you with that. And then you've got to use your own cognitive faculties and thought process to figure out if this person's a good fit and can they fulfill on what they're promising they can fulfill on. The other, the simpler Gen Pop answer for everyone is, you've got to figure out what you can do and do more of that, and then slowly work towards what you can't do. Maybe doing the Pilates class or that high impact thing or F45 or whatever that is that you've heard is really good might not be great for your back right now, but maybe doing a yoga class that you might not typically like might be something that you can do right now, because they might give you more different variations. And because it's a little slower, they sort of can come around and they support you a little bit more. I mean, I love yoga for that reason. I think it tends to be slower. People tend to spend time at end range positions holding them. And even though most people call that stretching, you and I, and this is what I'm going to call like a truth moment here, and people can be upset with me if they want to. The reality is that if you're holding your body in a position, you are contracting your muscles. And if you're holding them at end range, they will get neurologically stronger there. And in many cases, physiologically, cellularly stronger. If you haven't done that thing in a long time, been in that position for a long time, that can make you feel really, really good. So, bringing it back to the initial question, you got to start with what feels good. And as those things get stronger, that strength bleeds out and supports other joints in your body. And then from there, you might get more access to strength in your back that you didn't know you had. And that might allow you to do that thing that you want to. As a quick, maybe scientific physiological lesson that people might take away to help rectify this or ramify this or solidify this is, most every joint in your body has muscles that cross it and another joint. We know, for example, semitendinosis and semimembranosis, typically called the hamstring group. You ask general person, what do the hamstrings do? Oh, they bend your knee. They pull your knee towards your butt. True. But because they also attach where the hip joint is, they also extend your hip. So guess what? If you do some knee curls, your hip's going to get stronger. Or if you do a hip exercise, your knees will get stronger. And this exists all over the body, right? We know that some of the hip flexing muscles actually also attach to the front side of the lower part of your spine, which means if you do some hip flexing exercises, even though you might not feel it in your stomach or your back, the muscles that would support your stomach and your back are getting stronger. And that will give you access to doing more back stuff that you want to do. So, start with what feels good, do more of that, and that will open up access to what doesn't feel good. And if you're a person where you're like, I don't know anything about exercise, you either have to spend a lot of time learning and researching, or you have to invest a little bit of your change into finding someone that can help you figure out where you want to go. It's kind of one or the other, unfortunately, but that's the reality.
That's great advice. I mean, that's some takeaways people can take home to the bank. But I think it's also important maybe to touch on this, which is the dose response component of this. How does someone who maybe doesn't know much, how would they take that advice and then dose it accordingly to their capabilities and make sure that they're not doing too much? Because if you do too much, all sorts of adverse effects, being really sore, maybe those sensations they don't like get magnified. So what are some easy ways for someone that you can help in just a soundbite, give them a sense of how to figure out the right amount for some of these things?
You can go tit for tat on this one. We can go back and forth a little bit because I know you've got some ideas. I think I got some ideas too.
Okay.
All right, perfect. So my first one would be how do we figure out the dose response here? My first general, if it hurts, and it's an uncomfortable kind of jointy sensation or extreme pain, don't do it. Do something different. Right? Do something different. As a generality, if something's bothering you more than a 1 out of 10, it's probably something that you should ease off of. Or if you can do some of that thing, but then after you do, 10 repetitions of the thing, or you do it for 30 seconds, it starts giving you a bit of discomfort, stop, and then move on to the next thing, or rest a little bit, then do the next set. So do a little bit. As long as there's no pain, keep doing it. If it starts getting painful, stop. That'd be my first one. Throw it off to you, Eric.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would first think about your historical context. How much have you done this thing? If you've never done it, I would start off real easy and not make it challenging much at all. If it's something you have experience with, you might be able to nudge it forward in small amounts. Say if you're doing a leg raise and you've done 8 reps and you've been doing that for months and months, well, let's just add 1 or 2 and just progress it that way. I would also add, though, if you have injury or pain around a joint when you're doing a particular exercise, you might not want to go through your full range of motion. Near the ends of the motion, at the complete end range of the joint, that's where a higher chance of something called neurogenic inflammation can pop up, and that's where you can have unwanted sensations come into it. So if you just modify your range of motion, that can do wonders too. And there's nothing wrong with that. Your tension through the muscle is really a goal. And if you have that, you can still get stronger. So you have to maybe modify things. Now your turn.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and just to add on that, I love that because you could take something just if you have a hard time getting in and out of a chair, which might sound benign to some people, which might sound really hard for other people. If you can get up and down out of a chair 8 times and gets tired, maybe you do 6, you rest for a minute, you do 6 more, you rest for a minute, you do 5, then you start feeling tired again. You're like, okay, I'm done. And that could really be all it takes to start progressing that forward, right? Really, really simple low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Another way to think about progressing yourself, or a way to moderate exercise. I mean, if we're doing something that feels good, you can think about it on a scale from 0 to 5. I'm a big fan of, when I can, to quantify things. Can we put a number on something that might otherwise be qualitative, right? So for example, feeling the burn in a muscle when you're exercising, it is a physical sensation. It's very qualitative. It feels like it's burning. Is there a way that we can add a mental perception to that? Maybe that starts happening when you feel you're 70% through the set, or a 3.5 out of 5 through the set. He's a colleague of ours at Strata, and he may be a colleague of yours, a gentleman named Charlie McMillan. He's doing his PhD right now in the States, I think Baltimore, if I'm not mistaken. And he's developing something called the PEC scale. And he's literally using this PEC scale to create a quantifiable way that people who have cancer and other very serious diseases can start working out and exercising without overdoing it and improving their strength. He's literally working with people who are undergoing chemotherapy, which is crazy to think about. And so you can think about, if you're doing an exercise, instead of it being like trying to get to a certain number or feeling a sensation, you can do some. And maybe the first time you do it, like getting up and down out of a chair, you do it till your legs are at a 2.5 out of 5 fatigue. And then you do that for a week. And then maybe the next time you take it to a 3 out of 5 fatigue, and then a 3.5 out of 5 fatigue. And it's a really, really easy way to quantify otherwise qualitative sensation in your body to help you move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes me wonder what your thought is on determining effort level, since we're talking about it anyway. Effort is a
Yeah.
variable that you can modify within an exercise or a workout.
Mhm.
This is sort of what we're alluding to here. I guess, like, how would you, as a professional, determine what effort level is appropriate for someone to exert within an exercise? Obviously, based on their goals and their health history and things of that nature. What helps you make that decision?
Oh man, very tough. Without going to the weeds and making this as practical as I can for people, it's really, really tough, because when you have a new body in front of you, and I know you go through this process as well, collecting as much data as you can is really, really important. And that's why I know Eric and I both take a look at standing posture, lying down posture, range of motion. We'll take like muscle girth, right? See how much muscle you might have on one side versus the other. I'm not sure if I mentioned muscle testing, but we'll do that. We might even use some machines and do some actual exercise on the floor and do some assessing right to left. There's so much information and data that you can take on someone to see where they're at. And then you can make some inferences there. Even things like you mentioned before, what's your health history? What medications are you on? How old are you? Have you had any children? Are you male versus female? There's all these things that come into play. Not to make it overly complicated for people, but these are like high level considerations that, if when you can, it helps to make. Having said that, if someone just said, Glenn, here's a fresh body, we're not telling you anything, but you got to exercise them. The first thing I would do is I'd say, okay, let's take a look at some basic stuff. Like, what's it like if you try to do this machine and I have it like at literally the lightest weight, and I might say, hey, can like show me how far, like I'm going to set it up like in a really like open way, in that we're not going to squish you up too much. Like if we're using a leg press, hey, can you fit in this machine right now comfortably? Yes. Can you try to bring your legs through the range of motion that I want you to do? You got some more room? That doesn't bother you? Great. Let's shorten that machine up. Let's close it up a little bit. Let's give you more range of motion. Okay, great. Can we move out of this one a little bit? Yeah, we can move just a little bit so you're not getting smushed in there. Great. Maybe this is a good place to start. Let's put the lowest weight setting on there. Just do an easy set of 1 or 2 here. Just tell me how it feels. And if it doesn't feel good the second you start, just stop. Oh, that feels super light for you? No discomfort? Great. Let's add a little bit more weight, 5 or 10%. Oh, it still feels good? Great, let's add a little bit more weight. Oh, still feels good? Great, let's add a little bit more weight. And I kind of progress them that way. And then from there, I'll be honest, if we're thinking about the very first time someone's at the gym, if they've never done any exercise before, boy, you would be in for a whirlwind knowing how little you have to do to actually create any kind of change in the body. Just to give you an example, if you're listening at home, or if you have a loved one that's going to get into exercise, or you want them to get into exercise, if you think about doing something just like a leg press machine, this is a machine where it looks like you're doing a squat, but you're kind of sitting or lying inside of a machine. Someone's body has unlikely generated force in those positions for even, 20 very, very light repetitions in a long, long time. That's a scenario that body hasn't been in a long time. And even just doing 1 or 2 sets that feels very, very easy could have someone wake up the next day with a lot of muscle soreness. It really takes so little. So, I mean, the short of the long is you have to be do way less than you think you have to. Don't force yourself into any kind of positions that don't feel good. And just do some light, easy stuff and see how it feels. I mean, that's how I do it at a very base level for someone. Unfortunately, if it's just you in the gym, it's a lot of self-experimentation. That's really what it comes down to. I don't know if you agree with that or not, Eric. I'd love to learn and see if there's maybe you got a different opinion. If someone just gave you a body, what you would do, because I feel like there's a lot I could learn from you. You've been doing this, I think, maybe longer than I have, and I think you have, to be honest, more education than I do as well. So, I mean, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
No, I mean that's very kind of you, but I would say I'm right in the same ballpark. You kind of the crux of what you're saying is pay attention to your body, your sensations, how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious, investigate, be willing to make small adjustments, and go from there. I would only add that if you're unsure how long to take a set through, say you're more experienced and not a new person, there are a lot of ways you can determine when a set should be over. A lot of times I like to use form. If you set up a certain type of form and you're maintaining that form and in that one rep, you just break it unintentionally, that might be the time to stop because now you're getting fatigued, you're compensating in some fashion. There are perfectly fine instances where you can let that go, but
Mm-hmm.
the question is why? Why do that? If you can't maintain it, there might be a reason why. You might be fatigued enough, and if you're fatigued enough, you might have stimulated the tissues well enough. Is there any reason to go further? And if you're really good at lifting, you might keep your form until you hit failure. And that's a whole can of worms. Like, what is muscle failure in the first
Mm-hmm.
place? Is it I
Yeah.
can't lift the weight at all? I can't use the muscles I'm trying to use. I can't feel them anymore. My speed changed. All those could be some version of failure. So I guess
Yeah.
I'm wondering your perspective on taking someone to muscle failure in an exercise. Is there a point in time where that's appropriate? And if there is in your head, when would you
Mm.
bring that in for someone?
That's a very good question. There's so many different scenarios in which brings to the muscular failure could be beneficial. And again, like what is muscular failure? I mean, one of the things that we do know, and if you're listening at home, you're into exercising, and you haven't heard about the different kinds of contractions between like the concentric phase, like overcoming the resistance, maybe the pause at the top where you're in that transition phase between going up and going down, and then the eccentric or the lowering phase, you can be 30 to 40, in some cases 50% stronger lowering downwards. So even if you can't move the weight up anymore, if someone pushed that weight up for you and they told you to hold, you could ride that thing down for a while before you totally give out. I think one of the prerequisites for some of these things, like going to muscular failure, right? Let's just define it as like I can't do any more with pushing up, right? Because that's what most people are going to be familiar with. Ultimately, is like, do you have the support and all the other structures to do that in a way that you're not going to injure yourself and hurt yourself? Because you may have the muscular strength, but if you have an arthritic knee and there's bone on bone contact and that's painful, you could be setting yourself up for some bad news bear. So at first I'd say you do have healthy joints to do these kind of things. Now there are plenty of people, and I work with them in their 70s and 80s, where like we can take them pretty close to that area and they feel okay. Some of the times I might do that as a professional is I want to see how robust is this joint when they work it really, really hard once it's done. Because one of the things that I'm interested in for a lot of my clients are some of these lowest common denominators that I think are the root cause at a lot of their either discomforts in their body or the things that are stopping them from having a higher quality life just in terms of their movement. Are these pieces strong enough? Because if you, for example, do a leg press or a squat, right, some kind of pushing motion with your legs there, some muscle group is likely going to give out before anything else, be it the quads, right, the knee extensor muscles or the plantar flexors or your hip extensors, or maybe something on the opposite side of the joint, which is more of a joint manager in that position. Something's got to give there. And if it's given in the gym floor, that might be the thing that gives out in your day-to-day life that's stopping you from really enjoying your life. So if I know, for example, my mother-in-law had a history of like her right knee just not feeling right, and it's in a spot now where she feels really good, and I know she can push it far, I might have her do a set of knee extensions so she can't do any more. And then maybe I'll check with a dynamometer, which is a way to gauge how much force a joint is creating. I might go and check and see, is this thing still pretty high up there, even if it's taken to a failure spot, or is that right side now way lower than the left side? Can that joint not tolerate it as much, even though it feels relatively similar for that person? The other times it may come into effect in terms of training muscular failure is depending on your goal, perhaps maximal strength or hypertrophy, We know for people who are more experienced in lifting that if you want to have more hypertrophy, you have to, which is increasing muscle size, you have to train relatively closer to failure. Elite bodybuilders typically, because their bodies are so well adapted to and their muscles are so big and they've already maxed out their potential, they usually have to train once, maybe twice a week, pretty close to failure in order to continue to see muscle size gain. If I take little old Grandma Sue, who's 65 and she hasn't really exercised a day in her life, I don't have to take her there. So for those people more advanced, really want to build some muscle, failure becomes something that they dip into a little bit more often. The question is, can someone tolerate it? So, do I see, be able to take people to failure as a tool that we can use to either improve muscle mass, maximal strength, or to check on the quality of some of their joints? Absolutely. But the prerequisite for doing that is, are they feeling healthy? Does it feel good to do that in the sense that doesn't cause them pain or discomfort, right? Like,
yeah,
caveat, if you're doing 10 or 20 repetitions of something right to the bitter end, it's going to burn. And that might not feel good to you, but that's a different not feeling good. That's like an uncomfortable and working hard, not an uncomfortable, my knee's about to blow out scenario. And there's a bunch of other routes we can go down through, which is like, is muscular failure just when I do a muscle test on someone they can't hold and I pull their arm all the way up, right? Just like a 1 repetition max of something they can't hold. Like I say, ready and hold, I try to move them out of a position. If they can't hold that, that's technically a 1 rep max where I beat them and they couldn't do it. Is that failure? That question mark? That's kind of depends on the context and the situation.
100%.
I'll throw it back to you.
You can talk an hour about the intricacies of what failure means. So it's just a matter of how you define it. We've been talking about dose response. We're talking about different effort levels. And I think when we think about longevity, which is such a big topic right now, everyone wants to live long and not just live long, but have a long health span and feel good when they're older. When we get older, we have to consider changing these things and these variables. Like you alluded to, you're my age now, 30, knees are good. When I'm 60, maybe I have arthritis. How should I be thinking about modifying my exercise as I get older? And when people are training, should their exercise look like the same when they're 70 as they are 40? So what kind of considerations do we have to make for people when they're training for their whole lives?
I don't think, maybe hot take here for people who are general pop. We'll see. I think you might agree with this, or you might disagree. And I'd love to hear any pushback that you have, because I'm really enjoying our discourse. Yeah, it really doesn't matter to me if you're 70 or if you're 7. It's coming back to what is the, based on all the data that we have, what's healthy and what can we use, and like what's not healthy in your body and what can't we use, and what is your health history. It just turns out that someone who's 70 has 10 times more lifespan than someone who is 7. And so we just have to be considerate of all those different things that got them to where they are that day, day-to-day stresses that have accumulated over their lifetime, the different health of their joints, all that kind of stuff that would go into who are they right now. And so do I think the principles of how we work with someone change, whether they're 7 or 70? No, we just look at what's their goal, right? End thing, outcome they want to be at. Where are they at right now, starting point, and then how do we reverse engineer backwards the best way to get them from where they are to where they want to go? But I don't really think any of the principles or how we go about it changes. It's just a matter of what's the most appropriate for this person right now to get them to where they want to go. Thoughts?
Yeah. No, I agree. It's really the same recipe. It's a different recipe, same process. You're trying to figure out what you can tolerate, how you can progress, maybe regress depending on the day or what your goals are. But yeah, it's ultimately that. Pay attention to your body, investigate, act accordingly. And if you're not seeing progress and you can handle more, do more. If you're having blowups and not feeling good, regress and go from there. But yeah, it's basically the way I think about it too. You know what?
Oh, sorry. May I add one thing if that's okay?
Yeah.
This stuff's probably not sexy. Do you know what I mean? Like what we're talking about, it's not really sexy. People here, like this is I feel like, and this is fine. A lot of this conversation is going to fall on the ears that need it. General population people, you might hear this and be like, that's not really, I want to know like the best exercise for this, or, the new fad for this, or like, how do I get, and like, ice plunges, they're so good for you right now. There's so much information. It's a big fad. The reality is at the end of the day, you are wherever you are right now. And to get to wherever you want to go has to be titrated around your body. That's kind of the short of the long. And then you just got to, as Eric rightly said, investigate, pay attention, collect some data information, readjust as you need to. And, as I said, stay committed, not attached to the path, and then progress. And that's really the short of the long. Just like anyone else, if you're in business long enough or in a healthy relationship long enough, and you ask people, you've been together for 50 years, what made that relationship work? Or you've been in business for 50 years and you created Amazon, you're worth billions of dollars, what happened? The person's going to tell you the same generic advice. I kept going. I kept learning. I pivoted when I needed to, and I kept going. I kept learning. I pivoted when I needed to. And all the other stuff is nuance that you learn along the way by educating yourself and speaking to other people and having mentors. It's not sexy, but it's the truth. And I really hope that, for some people, take this to heart, because you've probably heard this before. The truth will set you free, right? You heard that one before? At first, the truth will piss you off, and then it will set you free. This is the reality.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're all unique, as you said. And so that is sort of the popular thing. What I wanted to bring up was this group exercise world. And I know people love it. I do a small group exercise here at my studio. People enjoy the social dynamic. They enjoy sometimes the challenge, the competition. Given the proclivity of it and how popular it is, I'm wondering what your views are about group exercise and what are some of the pros and cons that come up into your mind.
Being a rational man is terrible. It's the devil. Get it out of here. We don't want it. No, I'm just kidding around. Obviously, it was a terrible joke that clearly wasn't landing with Eric at the time. Here's the thing: is for a lot of people, there's going to be nothing wrong with group exercise. Maybe for whatever that group exercise class is, it works for you really, really well in your body, or maybe it's stimulating in appropriate ways. And power to you. Go and do it. Some people, they need community and to be around other people in order to get themselves in gear. And I don't want to take that away from anyone. We're starting to experiment with more, group training options at Strata in the future. And you've got a group training class right now. And like anyone who's listening, if you're in the LA area, you should check it out, because I know Eric is going to make it titrated and appropriate for whoever you are and give you all the different nuances to the best of his ability that he can in a small group training class. If we're looking at pros and cons here, if you look back at the conversation we had, I think it's easy to reverse engineer. Like pro, less cost; pro, social aspect; pro, probably going to have a good time if the instructor is great, have some coffee with all these people, right? Pro, move your body, doing something is often, not always, but often better than nothing. Con, right? And this is probably the big overarching one, may not be appropriate for you. May not be helping you get towards the goals that you're setting for yourself. If your goal is to get better at downhill skiing, a general fitness class likely ain't going to get you there. But if your goal is just to generally feel more fit and your body feels pretty good, you're not really worried about those aches and pains, maybe that F45 class with the right amount of weights is going to be just fine for you right now. And that's okay too. I think this is probably the thing that I would tell people to be thinking about if they're considering group fitness classes, is that oftentimes the ill effects of whatever we engage in aren't apparent until later on in life. When you're younger, you don't save much money. You're at 60, you've got nothing in your savings. All of a sudden, retirement don't look so good anymore, right? Because in retrospect, you should have been putting in money and investing a little bit every week and taking care of your retirement. It's the same thing with your body. That group fitness class might feel great right now. CrossFit might feel great right now. F45 might feel great right now. Insert anything here. I'm not picking on these things. Because I could just say the same thing. So you see a personal trainer. That personal trainer is not respecting your body in the gym. You end up getting hurt. I haven't hurt a client in a long, long time, but early in my career, I hurt some people. I'm not proud of that, but I learned from it. But a lot of times these fitness classes, you might be doing them at a higher intensity, but you might not feel the impact of that later on. 50% of female gymnasts who, or this is from like actual research papers, U.S. women's team gymnasts who medaled, over 50% of them have hip replacements now. Because high impact and forces going through the joints, oftentimes in positions they can't handle because they're spinning through the air. and excessive amounts of stretching have loosened up the joint capsule. And because of that, the joint now has rubbed on itself in inappropriate ways. Inappropriate physics and forces have gone through that joint such that they get arthritis by the time they're 50 and they feel so much pain, discomfort, they need to get a hip replacement. But they would have not have known that until they got to 40 or 50 and started experiencing those things. Mm-hmm. You might not know that from doing your general fitness class right now, that maybe some of those jump squats are inappropriate until you have tendonitis in your knees or until you tear a calf muscle because you just did one too many. So yeah, there are pros and cons. I think this is probably for me the biggest frustration with group fitness classes is, and this is no one's fault, I'm not pointing fingers, but there's that natural propensity just to want to keep up with everyone and not to necessarily bow out when it's appropriate for you. I did some CrossFit. And I want to be strong, muscular man, and I didn't want to stop. But I did this with Lululemon back when I was a staff member there. And at one point, I just started feeling like these sensations in my arm, but from doing overhead snatchy things. And I was like, I should really stop right now, but I got to keep going. I don't want to be like the one guy who stops and says, this is hurting my arm. And then I paid for that after doing those classes for a month by like the most wicked tendonitis, icky sensations in this arm. And I can tell you now, I have some neck things I'm working through now. And I'm pretty sure part of that came back to 3 months of just training like an idiot with arm overhead stuff, which, if people at home can't probably see, but my body can't get there. And I was constantly shoving in those positions. I'm probably belaboring this point, so I'll stop. But inappropriate dosing of exercise, as Eric has rightly pointed out earlier in this podcast, may not rear its head now. It might rear itself decades down the road, but you won't know it until it starts rearing its head. And that is probably the most frustrating thing I have on behalf of the consumer is no one told them any different at that point in time. No one told them that overdoing it is going to cause stuff later on in life. No one told them this. They said, we'll just monitor it for you. And then it's the elbow on your left arm and this elbow on your right arm. And then it's your right knee and then it's your left knee. And then you wake up one day being like, what the fudge happened to my body? It's sad. It keeps me in business. It keeps you in business, but it's sad. It's sad for me. I hate seeing it. It really makes me cry because I'm sorry, I got to get this. My purpose, help people feel confident in their bodies. And so to see this happen to people, it just breaks my heart, Eric. It breaks my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common thing you hear, especially like I had a trainer I was trying to bring on here, and he kind of did things in a way I was like, turning your knee in, turning your knee out on a leg extension, not lining it up with the machine. And I'm like, that's going to bother your knee, isn't it? And he's like, no, it never has. I'm like, yet.
Yeah.
But, you can't argue with someone who doesn't want to think of it in a rational sense. But that's partly why educating yourself on how your body works, taking the time to maybe find people to teach you that, take it home with you, remember, then you can try to do things safely. And that's also why I don't like group classes too, because I'm very competitive. So if I get in there, I'm going to try to go as hard as I can. I can't really tolerate that so well anymore because I'm pretty strong, but man, when I go to those hard places, it does not work out super well for me. And then I can't train for a long period of time, not really doing me a service. I did want to touch base on mobility, like talk mobility to me. What is mobility? Like, how do you see it? Is it just a matter of stretching that thing out, like you said, until you're, loosening your ligaments in your joints? Or what is it for you, man?
Eric, how dare you? How dare you? I know you are going to likely see similar stuff here, so maybe I'll try to go through some different layers. I actually did a presentation on this for local chiropractic clinic just 2 weeks ago, the 3 steps to improve mobility and keep it. And, one of the things that I said in the presentation, and I kind of like the analogy, and I think this is the hotkey on the computer. If you are going Microsoft Word or in Google Docs or whatever your word processor is, they're all pretty much ubiquitous. If you hold Control H, you bring up the find and replace feature, which means you can take any word in that document and change them all from one word to another. Right? If I was writing a script and I put Glenn as the character and I want to change the character's name to Maverick, I can push Control H and just click Glenn and say I want to replace to Maverick, and replace everything to Maverick. Everybody in their lexicon, their vocabulary, their rhetoric, however you want to look at it, replace the word mobility with the word strength, because ultimately your mobility is dictated by how strong are your muscles and your nervous system and their ability to pull you into those positions. So getting strong in end range positions right? Like through a full joint excursion, right? Like a full twist left to right or a full overhead press if it feels good, right? Keep in mind, don't push through pain. Those are the ways that you improve your mobility. Now, if we were to like look at the layers here, there are different things that kind of come into play, right? What's the quality of the other tissues in your joint? Your muscles may be super strong, but if you have arthritis in the joint, it's probably not going to want to move to some of these extreme ranges, maybe right now, and that's okay. So there's other things to consider when we think about mobility. To your point about stretching per se, stretching is really interesting. And I find I talk about this literally with every new person comes through the door. And I know you've heard us talk about this before. And I'm not sure if I heard this from my colleague Brandon or if I heard it from Mac or something different. But, I hold up a piece of rope and a piece of elastic band. I say to someone, a rope's more like muscles or more like elastic bands. And, 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, people say, oh, they're like elastic bands. And, I'm kind of baiting them a little bit. We're playing a little bit of a game, but I say, great, tell me why you said elastic bands. And they say, because they what, Eric?
Yeah, they stretch.
Right. Now, you and I both know from our research that they don't stretch. And I used to think that I was literally taught in university, muscle stretch, you should stretch. Words people literally used who are anatomy professors literally told me muscle stretch. The reality is muscles contract and they're more like rope. And they're like rope in that the cellular structure doesn't really give. So if you tear a fray of rope, you lose integrity. If you tear or legitimately stretch a muscle, you lose integrity. That's like a muscular strain, right? In soccer, my favorite sport, happens all the time. People are sprinting. It's the last minutes of the game and the muscles are so tired. They don't contract as well. All of a sudden they end up pulling their hamstrings. So the natural question is, but Glenn, I put my arm in a door jamb and I do that thing where my arm's in the door jamb and I turn my torso and I use my torso, my hips and my legs to stretch out my muscle. I get the stretching sensation. Glad I'm stretching. I know I'm stretching, right? The reality is what you're feeling is your muscles contracting. And the reason you're likely feeling that contraction in that position is because you're getting through such a long range of motion that your body's starting to get a little bit worried. It's trying to say to you, hey, if you keep going like this, could be bad news bears. Could be bad news bears. We're working hard right now. The best way to think about how muscles actually lengthen out and then come back to their resting position is more like Velcro that unstitches and restitches up thousands of times a second. I always am jealous of little kids and some older adults because they have those Velcro shoes that you unstitch them and then you tighten them back up and they stay on the feet. I'm I just love that kind of simplicity in my life. Fortunately, they don't make a ton of those for adult men who are 38.
I'll get you some.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. You send me your guy. I hope they're Mindful Motion LA branded.
They're unicorn. They're perfect for you.
Okay. Beautiful. I feel like a unicorn. But just like how you can unstretch and restitch up Velcro, right, and make the shoe tighter. You can literally, when your muscle contracts, it's like unstitching and restitching up the parts of the muscles that contract and shorten up thousands of times a second. And that's what allows you to do this really fast and quickly, is because of that intricate uncoupling and recoupling of different muscle cells, or the cells inside of a muscle. And so muscles don't stretch, right? They just contract. And as long as you can contract them through a full range of motion without any kind of discomfort, you ought to do that if you want to increase mobility. And then if you want to keep it, you just have to do it more often. And if you want to build some endurance there, well, guess what? Spend some more time in those positions. Mm-hmm. You see this a lot with people who I work with who've had shoulder rotator cuff repair surgeries, right? They get to a point where they're moving pretty good. And then we start okay, great, come up here. Now let's hold it for a few seconds and let's come back down. Let's get back up there and hold it for a couple of seconds. Let's build some strength and endurance and mobility in the part of the range you don't have as much access into right now. So your body gets more adapted to that. So it feels good, right? The last thing I'll say about this, if that's okay, because you got me on a tangent. Is that okay? Can one more thing? I know we're getting close to time here.
No, go ahead.
This is something I got from sports training, but I'm pretty sure everyone uses it across the board now for exercise training. It's the SAID principle. You've heard of the SAID principle, Eric? Or maybe you've heard of a different way?
A long time ago. I can't remember the acronym exactly what it stands for.
I already know that you do this and you think about it like this, but it's just an easy way to help people remember specific adaptations to impose demands. Mm-hmm. So whatever you do in the gym and you train your body for is what you'll have access to in real life. This is why in the work that Eric does, for example, he's really trying to figure out the areas of your body, the elephants in the room, the lowest quality areas, the ones that are holding you back, and getting them better in a way that feels good for you. Because if you get the lowest common denominator up by working on that specific piece in the way that it needs to, otherwise said, specific adaptations to impose demands, that piece will be more available to you in your day-to-day life, which means, oh, my back tightness isn't so bad anymore. Oh, I can move my shoulder overhead. I couldn't do that before. Oh, my grip strength's getting better. Oh, my knee pain's getting better, because you're giving your body what it needs. And guess what that comes down to, people? Having the right data that you need to figure out where that area is to work on, making sure that you're not overdoing it and that it feels good, that doesn't feel painful, doing what you can now, and then progressing that over time in a smart way so you get better and better, which I feel like is a wonderful summary of this entire conversation.
Yeah, that was a nice way to wrap it up. And, it's just funny when you talked about the Velcro and whatnot. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember hearing this in RTS, and I'm a little rusty about it, but we always think if we contract a muscle, like I do a bicep curl and I just lift that weight, I contract it, that all the fibers in that tissue are going to contract. But I'm pretty certain that you don't have to have everything playing the game.
Correct.
And if you want to improve something that maybe doesn't function well and lending to more mobility and keeping that mobility, we really want a robust full contraction of the entire tissue and really getting everything participating as best we can at different effort levels, for sure. And that requires focus. So if you want to have mobility and you're thinking long-term longevity and health and staying in it and enjoying the process, maybe it would help or behoove you to pay attention and focus on what's happening in the muscles that you're training so that you can make those contractions higher quality, more pristine, and reproduce them. It's almost a meditative process if you want to take it there. If that makes you feel uncomfortable, don't call it meditation, call it focus. But I just like that word.
Yeah, me too. No, that's really, really well put. I suppose, like putting all educational bodies aside, just looking at it from like a physiological and biological perspective, to some degree, a lot of those fibers are going to be working, even if you're doing like partial curls. Like most of that tissue is going to hypertrophy. Like it is contracting to some degree, right? Just from like a purely cellular perspective. However, certainly certain parts of that range of motion are going to fatigue out. Certain muscle fibers in that range of motion can fatigue out way quicker than other ones as you go through that. The other thing that I think often gets neglected, and this doesn't come up as much in the general health population, is just like the nervous system's role and responsibilities and all this. Because ultimately the muscles and the nervous system, they communicate with each other, talk with each other, intimately related. Like you can't really even separate muscles from nerves. It's kind of like a very tight weaving of them together. Even like tendons and muscles, we talk about them from an anatomy perspective, like the bone, the tendon, and the muscle are different things. The bone fuses into a tendon, the tendon fuses into a muscle, which fuses back into a tendon and fuses into the bone. It's one congruent system. And even from a muscular measurement perspective, if you do bicep curls in this middle range, right? Like just like through a very small range of motion, you will get way stronger here than you will in this position. But from my understanding, there's, depending on who you are, you will get 5 to 10 degrees of strength improvement on either end of wherever you're working, but certainly not through the full range of motion. So maybe your muscles look big and strong because you do this partial range. But if we ask you to start doing things functionally in those end range positions, the output's going to look different.
Yeah.
And ultimately, human movement is an orchestration of all, I think it's 642 or 652 muscles in your body simultaneously. And if you start losing out in output in any one of those joints, something's going to make up for that. And most people end up getting tight and achy or feeling discomfort somewhere because they've lost so much contractile ability in some of those muscles, or probably more accurately in the joints those muscles would move, that they start not feeling good. So like robustness really comes down through as much range of motion as strength as you can, through as much of a full range of motion in your entire body based on whatever your current settings are right now that allow you to feel good and move through those things. And hopefully over time, you can improve that. Some situations you're not going to bounce back from. I got clients with 8 different joint replacements. Those things ain't moving the same symmetric left to right anymore. Never going to happen. They know that. I'm upfront with them. But we get whatever we can going through as much of a range of motion, because that's what it takes to have them move and feel their best for their life, really.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think this is a good place to put a pin in it for now. This was great. We covered a lot of ground. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your hectic schedule to drop some wisdom and then give some knowledge for people. So I hope people found it valuable. I know I did, and maybe we can do another one in the future.
Man, I'm down to this whenever, and that's not like a mouthpiece. It's like I really enjoy these conversations. I think I learned a lot from you and what you were saying in certain different parts here, and I hope people learned a lot from this conversation as well. I really enjoy talking to people. It's a great way to continue to sharpen the old communication skills in front of the camera here, and it's great to have more people in the world, and the more information we can share, and the more confident we can make people in their bodies, and it's just a positive thing in my mind.
Perfect, dude. Yeah, you're just a positive person all around.
I try to be. Thank you, though. You too.
All right, man. Well, have a great week, and thank you again.
Yeah. Can I leave the people with one last parting thought, if that's okay?
Yeah, do it.
I would encourage everybody, general life thing, but also when it comes to exercise, try to be as abstract in your thinking as possible. Allow all these different policies to filter in your brain and see things differently, because the more you're open to seeing things differently in the human body and the rest of your life, the more open you are to change. And the more open you are to change, the sooner you'll get to where you want to go in life. So continue to be lifelong learners, continue to try to think as abstractly as you can, really try to understand where people are coming, and I think you'll have a life well lived.
Nice way to wrap it up, dude. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Have a great one.
You too, man.